What were your first steps in entrepreneurship? Even before McKinsey, before the US MBAs and all this stuff, can you connect the dots between that and meditation and what you actually did later with this monastery? Do you think this can also be helpful to founders for different purposes, right? Like, how do you connect that to founders?
I couldn't speak any word of English. I was 18 years old and I didn't have $1 to pay for a school. I just bought a round trip flight with Ryanair for like $30. I wanted to figure it out. I looked at the list and I picked the most random place that I could find, which was Korea. So I ended up going to Seoul for a semester. Best months of my life. If anyone listening is in college deciding where to go on exchange, go to Korea. It's insane. We were pulling like 3 all-nighters a week, basically, sold $2.5 million of our own NFTs. And we used that experience to learn where there was friction. For me, I feel like, I have like the hermit part of me that just wants to go and live in a cave for the rest of my life. And then there's the other mode, which is I just like learning things. I like doing things. I like, building stuff.
Welcome, Rodri. Thank you for coming on, man. Super excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So I think you start one of the companies that are most interesting in the space, right? Like a way to describe it could be Stripe for Web3. Correct me if I'm wrong. You guys recently raised over $20 million. And I think it's really cool, both from your personal experience, what you've done, and how you started. You got to entrepreneurship, which I think is pretty unique as a path, and we'll get into it. But also the space in which you operate, from NFTs to stablecoins to AI agents. And I think it'd be super interesting for people to understand a bit more about this space. And yeah, I think you're someone who tells a really good story. So I think it's going to be pretty good. So why don't we do that? Let's go back to the beginning a little bit, no? Yeah. So what were your first steps in entrepreneurship? Even before McKinsey, before the US MBAs and all this stuff, like what drove you towards starting things and creating?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Pontevedra, a small town, in Galicia. It was very active as a kid, but there were not like that many entrepreneurs around. I was very addicted to video games growing up. And so the first company I ever started was like reselling internet servers to be able to pay for my own. That was when I was like maybe 14 years old or something like that. Then when I was 18, I left home. I went to study engineering, studied mechanical engineering in Tecno in Navarra. And then when I graduated, I wanted to do something related to tech. But in Spain at the time, there was not that much. So that was 2014. So I joined McKinsey. I thought that was a good way to pay back my student loans, to learn a lot and have a pretty accelerated learning curve. And so I did that for a few years. And while I was at McKinsey, there's this opportunity to do like secondments. So I did a couple at a startup and then at a VC fund in Singapore. From there, I came to the US for graduate school. I ended up dropping out of Stanford and Harvard to become a monk. Then I started selling NFTs from the monastery, and one thing led to another. And then we started the company. In the middle, I like doing challenging personal things to accelerate growth in that regard. So I did a lot of weird things along the way, from living in the suburbs of Lagos in Nigeria to living homeless for a few weeks, to doing retreats in a lot of temples from different religions around the world, and somehow ended up here.
What do you think drives you to do this type of stuff? Even your first entrepreneurial endeavor, that you mentioned, like, was it the environment? Was it something innate to you? Like, what drove you to build stuff?
I just like doing things. There's like this engine that it's sort of like pushing me to do stuff all the time. Just very creative, like to learn new things, like to push. Generally, I haven't, when I've been working on like more structured environments at other companies, it's been, your learning is a little bit capped based on the constraints of what the environment puts on you. And whenever you're doing things on your own, it's like, the sky's the limit. And you can really do anything you want. And so I just always found it to be yeah, really fun. There's not like a rational reason, like this is the reason why I like to do it. It's just my body. I just go and I just do it because it's very fun.
Yeah, this is the second founder I talked to from Galicia. Last one was Uli from Capchase. I think there might be something in the water there for you guys. And take me from the stuff that you've done. Can we zero in a little bit on going to London and being homeless for 36 days? Like, how did you come about this idea? I know Tim Ferriss had a framework to do this as well, which I read back in the day, but then I saw you actually did it for quite a few more days that they suggest. So tell me, like, how did this idea come about and why did you decide to execute it?
So the idea came because I couldn't speak any word of English back then. I was 18 years old and I didn't have $1 to pay for a school. So I just bought a round trip flight with Ryanair for like $30. And I wanted to figure it out. And so got there, had like a hostel for like the first 3-4 nights. Then I started looking for jobs, but no one would hire me. I applied for like Burger King, for like Kentucky Fried Chicken, all of the fast food chains. I probably gave out like, 100 or 200 resumes to restaurants, and literally no one would hire me. And in the end, I found a job. My first job was reselling theater tickets. So there's these like small shops where you can go and buy the ticket secondhand. And so those people would have me go to the theater, buy the ticket, and then they would resell it. So I was doing that, but then the second day, like the people in the theater were like, "You've been here before yesterday. We're not going to sell it to you." So my first job lasted like 2 days. The second job from there, working for like the same people, was as a club promoter. So I was at night just, taking people to clubs. And that allowed me to practice a lot of English, speaking, in the night. And then I would finish work at like 4 or 5 a.m. And then the street was already like pretty chill. So then would sleep anywhere I could. So I slept in like, parks, train stations. I remember one night I slept on buses. So I would take the bus like in Piccadilly, which is where I was working. It could take me for like 2 hours to like the most far suburbs of London. I would get out, take it back, and do like a round trip. So I did like 3 minutes. And to get into the bus, I would just like get a random ticket from the street, from the floor, and put the finger on the date so the driver wouldn't see it. So that was like that first experience. It was amazing. I spent a lot of time, in solitude thinking about. I was 18 years old, so pretty young, and it was my first time out of home. So it was a bit of a shock experience. I love cinema, and when I was a kid, I would be watching all of the movies, and it's amazing to see the progression of the actors from beginning to end because they're put into these situations that test their limits. And sometimes you see like a kid that pretty innocent, immature, and then suddenly, I don't know, aliens come, the world is falling apart, and they put through this hero challenge that towards the end there's such a character transformation that is fascinating. And I always thought like, well, maybe aliens won't come, but perhaps I can create my own experiments of sorts that push and help me grow faster. And that's how it started. And then that experience put a bit like the seed of spirituality on me from spending, so much time on those situations. There were also a few like weird situations. There was one night, there was this person that used to like, deal drugs, and I just started talking to him on the streets, and he offered me a place to sleep that night. And I was like, okay, sure, better than the streets. He was also Galician. So went there, spent the night, and then, came back. He was very helpful. He actually was the one who helped me find that first job. And then, 3 months after, I came back from the trip and he committed suicide. And there was like this collection of experiences that was so crazy for an 18-year-old that I think put me in a path to, spirituality and meditation that later manifested itself in other ways. And yeah, it was pretty cool and crazy. And I also got to learn a little bit of English.
That's fascinating. Can you connect the dots between that and meditation and what you actually did later with this monastery? Is it a particular type of meditation, and what attracted you to it?
Yeah, so I've tried different types. So after coming back from that, came back to college. That was my first summer of college, and then I could pick where I wanted to go for exchange, and I looked at the list and I picked the most random place that I could find, which was Korea. So I ended up going to Seoul for a semester. Best months of my life. If anyone listening is in college deciding where to go on exchange, go to Korea. It's insane. It was a time where I was having like some health issues. I had some chronic inflammation in some tendons and muscles, and I couldn't write. I spent like 2 years of college just writing with a splint on my elbow because I couldn't write, couldn't take notes in class, couldn't do any sports. It got pretty bad. And doctors were telling me, you will never be able to do sports. Like, we don't know what is the cause, but you go and figure it out. And just I started spending, when I was in Korea, more time reading about, yoga, meditation, and so on. There was one day that I was thinking like, well, there's all these things I need to sit and think about them properly. And so I had like a week-long vacation from college. So I went to a store, bought a sleeping bag, and I started walking. And I ended up walking half of the country, the peninsula from left to east. Whenever there was a place to, where I was tired, so on, I would just put the sleeping bag on the floor and I would just sleep there. And that was an incredible opportunity of doing, like walking meditation. There's basically nothing. You forget about everything. You just walk. A lot of people, do the Camino de Santiago, the St. James Path, and they're like, this is one of the best experiences of my life. And for me, that was perhaps something like that. And when I finished, I was like, well, I want to get deeper. So I found a monastery in the middle of the country, and I went to spend a week. And I started getting much deeper into, it was like Zen Buddhism. There's many branches of Zen. We can talk at some point if that is going to be useful to the audience. But that was, some of the best days of my life. Generally, the best of my life are always happening in like meditation retreats. And I started, understanding my body a bit better and so on. And then eventually, like the problem that I have got healed. And it was, extraordinary. And from there, I started doing like more and more retreats. And so I've done probably like 10 or so since then in the last, it's crazy how time flies. That was 2013, so 12 years. And the biggest one was like the last one where I was like, okay, fuck the MBA. I'm going to become a monk and see what happens.
That's awesome. My dad did a Vipassana retreat like 15 years ago, and he runs marathons. So like he says there's no comparison in how tough 12 days, I believe it is, of silent meditation is relative to a marathon, which says that he started with a bunch of people, like a bunch, I don't know, dozens. And by the end, there were a handful because they just start dropping out of the uncomfortableness of being alone with your mind. No? And so I wanted to ask you, like, this inflammation that you had in your arm, did you get to any root cause, or was it something you were searching for? And do you think this can also be helpful to founders for different purposes, right? Like, how do you connect that to founders?
Yeah, I think so much of life, so much of our experiences, of our feelings, whether it's health, whether it's something more psychological, it's deeply rooted on psychological reasons. Whether that is like some chronic tension or some type of cognitive process that somehow has manifested itself in that type of symptom. For me, there was another episode of my life where I experienced something similar, which was when I was in graduate school. Perhaps it was like chronic stress from consulting and working so much for so long, but I needed to sleep a lot. So generally in my life I never slept a lot, but there was that period that for a few years I needed to sleep 8 hours, 9 hours a day to feel rested. And then there was one day in the temple where I wanted to conquer my fear of insects and animals. So I went into the forest and I started grabbing everything. And I grabbed that toad, didn't realize it touched my face and got poisoned for like 48 hours, like puking. It was awful. And in this temple, it's very strict. It's called Rinzai Zen. It's the most strict type of Zen Buddhism. They hit you with a stick if you're not sitting right. It's like really, really hardcore. And they wouldn't let me leave the meditation hall. So I was like, extremely sick. You literally cannot move. They hit you. You're like, really have to become one with that sort of like feeling of pain. And, the end of the second day, I was already like, I really cannot take this anymore. But, there's like 1 hour left. I'm going to really focus and give it a try. And I remember there was this moment where, the brain has certain triggers. There's one thing, for example, that I sometimes do, which is like, there's a nerve behind the eye that if you focus a lot and you relax, you almost like lose consciousness. It's like you like almost like fall to the side. And so the beauty about meditation ultimately is about like finding ultimate awareness of everything that is happening in the brain. You learn how to play with these triggers to generate some types of emotions or feelings. And so I went from that space of like being like really feeling the absolute worst to having this incredible burst of adrenaline. And there was that, realization of, so much of everything is just like a psychological layer. Whether that is like, maybe there's pain, but then there's like a layer on top, which is like the adverse feeling to the pain that actually is what manifests itself as, suffering in one way or another. And from that day, I went through a period of like 4 years that I was sleeping like literally 3-4 hours a night. And I was fine. I was feeling well rested. It was really, really incredible. And so for me, when I had that health issue before, the reality is I don't know what it was. Maybe it was like some nervous system dysregulation that created, overtension or what it was. But I started paying attention to every single inch of my body, try to understand it intuitively, try to, become one with the body and let it go. And eventually it got healed and I had like one of the most productive periods of my life. And the same thing happened the second time. The hard thing for me is integrating the meditation, that mode of being with the entrepreneurship mode, right? I don't understand balance so well. I'm an extremist. And so if I'm meditating and I'm in a temple, and if I'm working, I work a lot. But definitely very helpful to founders. Like the founder journey, it's so intense. And I think that it helps a lot with physical resilience, with emotional balance, and more mental clarity. There's periods where there are clouds, everything is chaotic. And if you always have like that tempo where with a couple of breaths, you can get really deep and relax and, see things with perspective. That's, I think, one of the most powerful tools that anyone can have. For the software engineers, I see it as, the ability to like change the state or the root, the source code, and have like full flexibility of everything that is happening in the machine and being able to rewrite it real time, which is the most powerful tool.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sometimes with complex problems, you're trying to rationalize your way through them. And meditation and meditation-like activities forces you to short circuit it and take a step back and then just let the supercomputer at the back give you the answers. When it comes to pain, I had a similar experience. Like I had a lower back pain. I went to 20 different doctors, neurosurgeons, everything under the sun. Everybody had a hammer and their own nail and they wanted to operate, right? And nobody could tell me the root cause. So I started like a journey of investigation because pain was intolerable. Like I couldn't sit or stand for longer than 15 minutes. This was for 2 years. It's pretty hardcore. And nobody could tell me the root. And I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like if you approach this from a normal problem-solving perspective, like why aren't any of these experts telling me? So doing my own research, I kind of came to a similar conclusion to you through a sort of a different path that went also through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Everybody kept telling me, like, you can't do any sport, you can't move, you should cut this thing open, and I didn't listen to that because I started meditating, and I felt better when I focused on my body and I moved my body, and it had a super direct connection with I think not doing what part of me really wanted to do, and also like probably some level of anxiety of doing or being on a professional path that wasn't for me. And I basically self-managed through jiu-jitsu, meditation, and reading a bunch of stuff about mind-body connection. If anybody has a back pain, they should read a book called Healing Back Pain by Dr. John Sarno. And it's actually quite interesting, like the empirical evidence that he looks at. He looks at like 10,000 people with back pain, and apparently like 50% in that sample like had back pain and 50% didn't. And when they actually looked at MRIs, there's absolutely no correlation between pain and actual deformities. And so the guy starts developing a set, like, a recipe for how to deal with this. And it's much more about the mind and I'm not going to say spiritual, but like trying to disconnect, like think psychology first. He doesn't let you use your rational mind to try to resolve these problems. So, super interesting. And when it comes to balance, because I also think meditation is a superpower for founders, even though I'm not very good at implementing it myself. So I'm really curious how you do it, because the context switching is crazy. For someone like you that just works nonstop, 25,000 problems, prioritization, do you make time in your day to like sit down and meditate? Like, what's your routine? Do you have a routine? Do you walk? Like, well, what are you actually doing to implement this?
So I'm a very cyclical person. And so there's periods where I just become obsessed with it. And there's periods where I struggle and I just don't do it because I'm in a different type of mode. With the company, it's very tough. I live next to a temple. So sometimes I go, and if I go and I do it, I generally don't do it so much for maybe like 10 minutes a day. I go and I spend like a full day. There's, whenever you're in a sitting session, a meditation session, I feel like the first few minutes there's the context switching. Like you're not really meditating. You're sort of like just trying to relax a little bit. And then over time, there comes these moments where you just feel like standing and going. And those are like the moments where that's actually where the learning occurs. That's where like the shifting of mental modes takes place. But that only happens if you're actually able to sit for longer periods of time. So generally, more like meta, my recommendation for those who want to get like really deep into meditation is to first, if possible, do like a Vipassana retreat or one of those. There's many places where you can go for a weekend and spend a weekend in silence. And if not, at least for like a day. Or maybe you have a wardrobe at home. Just lock yourself in the wardrobe for a day. If it's one of these like walking ones, there's space. Or any dark room. Just lock yourself there for a day. A Saturday, right? Like there's not so much cost to it. Life is very long. There's many weekends in a year, many days. Just take one day and lock yourself in the wardrobe and see. Because I just find it very hard to get really deep in just like 15 minutes here and there. It's obviously useful. A lot of people talk about this as a snowball. So you shake it and there's this effect. But then over time, if you let it, even if you only do like 15 minutes a day, it sort of just like goes back to its natural state. And so to answer your question, basically, I try to do that. So when I have the ability, I go and maybe I do a weekend or a full day. And then right now, I'm not spending so much time meditating other than at the sauna. The sauna helps me a lot. And the physical feeling of the extreme heat also helps tame the mind a little bit. Another recommendation, if people are interested in getting into meditation, is reading a Krishnamurti. The author is Jiddu, Jiddu. Krishnamurti. He's the best author on, for me, anything related to like meditation and so on. It's not like the typical surface level, like Western sort of like um, adaptation. Is like Indian philosopher from the 20th century that is like the deepest thinker I've ever read in my life.
Do you think there's a substitute for those who fear or don't want to just sit down and not do anything, like extreme sports, like some forms of yoga? Like, I do suspect, but I don't know, that there are substitutes to it, especially when you're going through periods of time where maybe you can't take a day off to do this. No, like maybe the 15 minutes is hard for a lot of people. So like, is there a substitute?
The question is whether like extreme sports and so on could be like a good substitute for being able to do deep meditation. I think yes. I mean, yeah, depends on like what you want to achieve, right? So one could be meditating for like decompressing and letting go and relaxing and so on. And that's, I think, like maybe when people think about meditation, maybe it tends to be a bit like that. And I mean, in that regard, you see a lot of, like these, marathon runners and, like extreme, nature, like people who do trekking and things like that. Obviously you get into, or like divers and so on, you get into like very deep meditation states of, states of flow and so on, which is fascinating. And for a lot of people, that may be a better way. There's a more like, deeper sense of like meditation that sometimes I feel like perhaps can be done in those ways too, but like sitting is like an extremely powerful technique to get to like truly ultimate awareness of the brain in ways that maybe sometimes it's a bit harder with the others. So it's a bit maybe on like the layer of that one wants to get into. But also I feel like meditation is particularly useful for those who have that feeling of hyperactivity. So like I have very extreme ADHD. I once did a test in graduate school. I don't know, the score was like 0 to 50. I was like 49. There's like this overflowing feeling of having to do things, exploring, learning, and so on. And such a powerful tool that when it's not properly controlled can also become problematic or have like, it's sort of like challenges. But when you combine that hyperactivity with meditation and you are actually able to manage the nervous system, manage those like that overstimuli, then you become like, like a machine. Like it's really, really, really powerful. And so basically for those to whom it's harder, it is the most useful. So there's periods in time in life where it's just like not possible. Like for me right now, it's like so hard to do it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I struggle with this. The only shortcuts I found to something similar has been diving, free diving. That gets you into a pretty spectacular place pretty fast. And also breath work. I did a breath work seminar. It blew my mind in terms of like how deep you can go, how fast. It looks a bit weird from the outside, but it's very powerful. Have you tried any of this before?
Yeah, I think so. For Zen, Buddhism, there's like many types. The ones especially more from like Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on, tend to focus a lot on like dogma, on scriptures, on like following Buddha and that sort of thing. Zen is like fuck all of that. Everything that matters is experience. This is like a first party game. And it's all about like practice. So it's like going to the gym and exercising your muscles. You exercise the muscle of meditating. So you're sitting and you have your eyes closed, and it's all about breath work for the most part. And it's like so powerful. And when you train it, then there's times where just one single inhale, like the inhale itself, gets you to a place where like the whole world stops. And it's very beautiful, powerful, psychologically, physically. So there's the book Breath that maybe you've read, that it's, I think, pretty good. And then there's one called Zen Training that talks about like some specific reading techniques that to accelerate sort of those experiences. There's one, for example, if people want to try it at home, and there's called like bamboo breathing, which is basically you inhale, you contain the breath for a little bit, and then think of the amount of air you have in your lungs to be represented by the y-axis. So you let it go slowly a little bit, or like without pushing, just like it goes, and then you do like a sudden drop, and then you continue like this, and you do another sudden drop. And then those moments of like the sudden drop, if you're like, fully focused, the amount of like release that they produce are extraordinary. So something maybe for people to try if they feel like testing something new.
Very cool, man. Thank you. That's super helpful and actionable for people. Bringing this back to your initial, let's call it vision, right? Like, why did you decide to work on this problem in particular? Did it come from any of these places of you having more serenity, more control over your nervous system? Like, is it connected at all? And why did you decide to tackle the problem that you're going after?
Yeah. So I don't think it's connected. I think that we all have like very different identities pushing for different things inside of our brains. And sometimes those, they help each other. But for me, I feel like, I have like the monk, ascetic, hermit part of me that just wants to go and live in a cave for the rest of my life. And that is very strong. And that the best days of my life were when I was living in that mode, whether, it's a retreat or something else. And then there's the other mode, which is I just like learning things. I like doing things. I like, building stuff. And again, like it's very hard to do both at the same time. So I have periods in my life that I do one or the other. And so how the genesis for the company is, so I always wanted to start a company. When I was in graduate school, I was exploring space. And so my initial hypothesis was, I was going to graduate the MBA and I was going to start a space company. And I had, a bunch of ideas. Was spending all my day reading, books about space missions and how to build, satellites and so on. Had spent like a summer in college in Denmark learning how to build microsatellites and so on. And so I had a few ideas there. But then I was like, well, the best days of my life were in temples. I think I can learn so much more there. There's like so many people in this MBA class. We were all doing the same things. Fuck it. And so I put that all to a halt and went to the monastery. And then when I was in the monastery, there was one day that I was like, well, I'm in such a great state right now. I feel like meditating about work. From this sense of like serenity, I want to get on my laptop. I want to try to do something and see and really observe everything that is happening in my brain to see how I can eventually, become better at it. And so I talked to my now co-founder, Alfonso. He's also Spanish. For context on his background, he studied, computer science and business in Spain. First of all, degrees in the entire country, studying them at the same time. Then went to Silicon Valley and worked at WhatsApp as the third PM, on Facebook, Google, and so on. And then he also wanted to start a company. We were introduced by a mutual friend from the MBA, who had been his friend in college. And I was like, well, let's try to do something today. And so he had just joined an accelerator and he was exploring ideas. And at the time, crypto was, NFTs in particular were exploding. This was late 2021. And we were looking at like people doing like, this, making a lot of noise and selling a lot of things that it didn't look like a lot of work. We were like, well, this is pretty easy. And more fundamentally, there was like this idea, like, I personally didn't know so much about crypto at the time, and my co-founder had spent much more time. But this general thesis that the world is moving to these decentralized rails of programmable money and programmable assets and contracts and so on. And we were like, well, there's something there, so let's explore. So we spent that day trying to sell NFTs. We did this anonymously. No one knew who we were. And we sold like, I don't know, $100. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. It's the first time in my life that I actually generate revenue. Before then, I had worked, consulting, other startups, investing, but it wasn't the same. And there was this exuberance, it just felt like really cool. And the next day I went back. I was trying to meditate again with the robes with the other monks, and I was like, nah, I need to go build something. And so the next day I submitted my resignation to the abbot of the temple, and I was like, I'm moving into a hacker house to Miami with my co-founder to sell NFTs. And what was going on? But there I went. And so then we spent, the accelerator is called HF0 for any aspiring entrepreneurs looking for a place where to start their company. It's extraordinary. Also, they call themselves a bit like the monastery for entrepreneurs. What they do is they remove every single possible distraction from your life in operational tasks, whether that is like food or laundry, you name it, all of that, they take it away so you can just focus on building, and put you with like, these 10, 15 other engineers in the same house for 3 months. All you do is just build. We were pulling like 3 all-nighters a week. It was insane. And at the end of that period, we basically sold like $2.5 million of our own NFTs, and we used that experience to learn where there was friction. So our initial thesis is we want to build infrastructure. We don't know what infrastructure needs to get built. Let's actually build something, some actual product, see the friction and fix it. And so we found that we were selling these NFTs, and our friends and family couldn't buy them because they didn't know how to. And so we built for ourselves a credit card checkout that allowed people to buy these digital assets without needing to know anything about crypto. And then we were doing about like 40% of our own sales via credit card. It was like the first time, like no one had done anything related before. And then other people started asking for it. So we opened it up for other people. And then early 2022, we were like, well, there's something there. So let's actually start the company. And so the initial thesis was, well, crypto is too complicated, both for developers and users. Let's try to abstract away the complexity. Over time, there are going to be very interesting use cases around, stablecoins, programmable money, agentic finance, and so on. At the time, what the market wanted were NFTs. And so we started focusing on that very quickly expanded to other adjacent services. So we built like wallet infrastructure, we built, tokenization tools. And a few months in, we started focusing on enterprise. And so closed the first contract with Diageo and Red Bull and a few of these large companies. And sort of became the standard for these enterprises to be able to tap into the technology. And then from there, the company started to expand to the use cases that actually, make a bit more sense, like long term, and where we're spending most of our time right now, which is things related to stablecoins. And so, I would imagine that some people in the audience maybe are like very proficient on stablecoins, but many others don't. And so, stablecoins are basically programmable money that is, when people think of cryptocurrencies, you have like things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are volatile crypto assets, which a lot of people buy either for, speculation, or in the case of Bitcoin, maybe like protection against inflation as a gold substitute or things like that. Stablecoins it's just like normal money. So you take, the most common one is USDC. And so what you're doing is you're giving $1, you're receiving a digital representation of that dollar that can be programmed, and it can be moved freely around the world at no cost by passing the traditional banking system, which is very inefficient. And so right now, every major financial institution in the world is thinking about stablecoins and integrating it. And we are one of the very few infrastructure providers that helps these companies be able to do so. So we serve primarily fintechs and financial institutions like MoneyGram, for example, where we help them put their 50 billion of annual transaction volume on stablecoins, be able to reduce the cost of those remittances, and then provision financial services to people on the other side. So they just launched a new MoneyGram app where we power all of the blockchain infrastructure for it that allows people to create an account and then access dollars, doesn't matter where they are in the world, get yield on those deposits, invest on tokenized stocks. So you can buy like Tesla stock from Colombia if you want, whereas before that wasn't possible. And so that's a bit like how it started and eventually how it evolved, skipping a lot of steps along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think along the way, correct me if I'm wrong, right, you've been very intentional about creating leverage for distribution as well. If I'm not mistaken, at the beginning, you were very intentional about getting distribution by integrating with one of the major marketplaces for NFTs, and that gave you a lot of capillarity. Correct me if I'm mistaken or not, but since I see you sort of like a Stripe for Web3, you've also been very intentional about a bottoms-up approach to developer-first tooling. And at the same time, as you evolve and you have this continuous, the thing that connects the dots between NFTs, stablecoins, and AI agents and programmable money is kind of you're in the infrastructure layer. So you've been intentional about getting developers on board, using your tools, and then once you're progressing through this journey, you're now also going enterprise with some deals like you're working also, is it possible with Red Bull and other brands like that, no? For specific use cases? So it's been very interesting to watch your progression, also from a product development perspective. I wanted to ask you specifically about the futuristic view. I think you guys are being brave with your product strategy. And I know that future could be further away or closer, but can you talk a little bit more about programmable money and like how this makes what changes in the world once you potentially have agents interact with the systems and the relationship between people and money changes? Because as far as I know, Stripe processes transactions and can process many transactions, but their fees got into them. Potentially in the world, you'll have billions of microtransactions with agents with specific budgets assigned to them for specific purposes that people can't even wrap their heads around right now. So can you talk a little bit about that programmable money and the infrastructure there?
Yeah. So there are basically, this discussion can take many forms depending on the time frame. So maybe I can start discussing what's happening today and then what's going to happen in like a year from now and onwards. So today, what you're seeing in the market is obviously the traditional financial system is extremely inefficient. It's very siloed and localized. So you want to send money from Spain to Africa, for example, and it's extremely expensive. Some people pay on average like 7% fees. Transaction takes a long time. And then people in those emerging markets, they do not have access to sophisticated financial products. So most of the world is not included into the actual financial system. That's on one hand. There's other things like banks only open 9 to 5, and the stock exchange is not open on weekends. And it's also localized, right? Like the Nasdaq or the IBEX work in one place. And if you're like in Australia and you want to trade on the IBEX, it's a major pain in the ass. There are a lot of challenges with this system that get fixed with stablecoins. Another challenge, by the way, is like if you're like an e-commerce, I presume that maybe a lot of people in the audience are in one way or another maybe related to it. The payment processing fees of Stripe or Checkout or these payment processors are like extremely high. And if you're like a low margin business, say like a restaurant, and maybe your profits are, I don't know, 3-5%, you name it, and you're paying 2-4% to the payment processor, if you could slash that, you're suddenly doubling your profits overnight. In Europe, because interchange fees are regulated, the problem is not so acute. But in the US, the baseline fee, for example, from Stripe is 2.9% plus 30 cents, plus 1% for international transactions. So for marketplaces, for low margin businesses, that is like an intense, very bad tax on the economy. And so stablecoins, what they do is basically they create a global composable system for money movement, where you can basically transfer fees for free instantly without having to go through those rails that have those high costs. So you could have like peer-to-peer payments where a user is paying a business and there's actually like zero fees in there, or nearly zero fees. There's also still not a lot of customer protection. The moment some of that regulation starts to kick in, like chargebacks and so on, some of that cost will go up. However, should be like, because you're removing a lot of the middlemen and the inefficiencies, much better than the traditional system. It also provides a lot of regulatory arbitrage. So today, if you want, for example, have an app and be able to take on balances on behalf of users, like the Starbucks app, for example, which in the US is one of the largest deposit-taking institutions in the world, in the country, you need licenses. You need like a level of regulatory overhead that is just impossible for most businesses to tackle, and that is localized. So if you want to launch in Europe, it's different than if you want to launch in South America or somewhere else. And so what stablecoins do is that you can basically be a non-custodial architectures that what that means is basically, let's say you have an app and you want to allow users to hold a balance inside of that app, you can build it in such a way that the app developer is not the one custodying the funds. It is the user via cryptographic means. There's like some key that is stored on their device that is the one that signs the transactions. They can take it out of the app and so on. You can do it in a way that the app doesn't need to have a license. And then you can do it or it's not a custodian. And you can do it in a way that then you can plug in more services, like being able to provide interest on the balances that are held on the app, allowing trading and more things via decentralized protocols that you can also tap into without needing the licenses. So what that means is basically you can have now, people used to say last decade, is the golden age of fintech. Like every company is a fintech company. But the reality is that it was still extremely painful. Easier than before, thanks to fintechs, but not nearly as easy as it becomes now, that you can truly launch a global fintech product in a week without any of that local complexity, regulatory overhead, or not as much. Obviously, you have to do things compliantly and securely and so on, but thanks to providers like us, that can be done via single lines of code. And so that is what is happening today, and what it will give birth to is to a new generation of, like last decade, it was like the Revoluts, the Chimes, the N26, the Monzos of the world. And like now there's going to be like a new generation of fintech products that are built natively on these crypto rails that is going to be extremely exciting. Plus all of the traditional institutions, whether it's the exchanges like the NASDAQ to like the largest banks, they're all somehow in one way or another integrating this tech. So that is what's happening today. What's coming is agentic finance. And so most economic activity will be intermediated by agents. Agents have become exceptional at writing code, at doing research, and so on, but they're still not economic actors. They don't hold funds, they don't move money on behalf of users for the most part. And there's many different use cases from like commerce. Say you're talking to an LLM or an agent and you tell it, hey, I want to find me a flight. And then they will find you the flight, but today they will send you to the website, and then you go and you buy it. And so all of that like native commerce experience on the agent interface, whether that is user being present or autonomously, say you tell the agent, I want to buy this flight. These are the parameters that I'm looking for. If there's nothing available, just keep searching, and when you find it, buy it. Or you could have like a customer support bot with some rules that when they're engaging with a customer, they're able to instantly transact or procure or do things like that. For example, in our office, we try to use all of our products in-house. And so we have a bot that whenever we need to replenish office stock, say buy toilet paper, there's a bot on Slack that is programmed with some rules that employees can go and be like, hey, buy me a Red Bull or buy me Monster toilet paper. And it goes and does the purchase and saves time from the assistant to do those things, or the office manager. And so what we provide there specifically, I guess like for both, for the use cases of yesterday and the use case of today, is we're an all-in-one platform that gives infrastructure to build these use cases. It's developer tooling, so suite of APIs. Everything is modular, so companies can use this for one theme, but not for the rest. And it includes like wallet infrastructure that you can embed on any application or surface or provide to an agent to be able to hold funds. It includes money movement infrastructure, so being able to go from fiat to crypto, from crypto back to fiat, being able to distribute those funds around the world. It includes tokenization, so being able to mint and distribute tokens to those users, and a suite of compliance tools to make sure that all of that is done safely. And so it's amazing to see. I think like most people probably haven't realized the extent how advanced things are and how basically every single major company is thinking about this. In the next 1 to 3 years, we're going to be seeing a revolution in financial services, unlike anything that has happened before in history, where for merchants, it's going to become amazing. Their processing fees are going to go down significantly. For users in emerging markets, they're going to be able to access all of these financial services for the first time. For everyone, they will be able to access, I think, like pretty cool products that before they weren't able to access. Like even in Europe, for example, like today, if you want to hold funds if you're holding funds in your bank, you're not getting anything. Interest rates are so low. And I know you can get like 4 or 5% if you just put it into USDC and hold it there. So there's a lot of things there. And then agentic finance is coming that is truly going to revolutionize everything. How we think about like commerce, things are going to be happening on e-commerce websites anymore. Most of that is going to be happening through these agentic interfaces autonomously. And it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. As 2 fast, rapid questions. What books have reshaped how you think that founders should read?
So anything from Jiddu Krishnamurti, very, very strongly, highly recommend. I love the art of Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. And then on my website, there's rodri.io/books. I put like a big list and somewhere highlighted. So feel free to go there and check it out.
Beautiful. Last question. Mistakes you see other founders repeating, if you had to say top 1 or 2?
The biggest one I made, I think, is when we started the company, we didn't have like so much experience hiring for a few specific roles, and we made like a lot of mistakes, and that slowed that down a lot over time. I think going back, I mean, obviously, if you have like nice investors, advisors around you, when you're hiring for roles that you've never hired for before, get those people to help you out during those interview processes, because you don't know what good looks like for something entirely new. And eventually it's all about hiring. That's the thing that matters most in company building.
Thank you so much, dude. Thank you so much. Where can people follow you? Crossmint. Give us the details. Some people can shoot you messages if they need to.
Yeah, my email is rodri@crossmint.com. Just feel free to pick me if I can help with anything. I'm available there. Twitter is like @RodriFernandez T, and LinkedIn, my full name too. And yeah, happy to help anyone if I can in any way or another.
Sweet, man. See you next time, man. Ciao, ciao.